call the meeting to order of the Fitchburg Housing Advisory Committee. I'm going to have Mayor Richardson say a few words and then we'll get started.
All right, well, first, thank you all for being part of this group. It's something that I think is going to be really valuable for the city. There's a lot of great things that I want all of your feedback on, and all of you have a lot of great expertise, which is going to be really valuable for the city. There's a lot of things that we're working on. One on the agenda tonight is the Dane County Housing Authority, something I think is something that is long overdue for us to be working with them in Fitchburg, and it's something that every other city in Dane County works with them. Every village except for Wanakee works with them, and I think there's a reason for that because they do a lot of great work. I think as we're looking to kind of refurbish certain areas of our city, North Fishhatchee Road being primary among that, I think they can really help a lot to take some of these properties that are very old and people maybe have been owning them for a long time, and they might be looking to divest of that, kind of sell those properties, and it gives us a great option for someone that can buy those properties, put some money into those and make those a lot better quality than what some of those are right now, and also some really high quality management of those properties. And, some of these people that are just kind of doing it on the side, they don't have the management expertise that someone like Dane County Housing Authority does. So I think that when you see projects like that coming through, that's going to be great. I know you'll be talking a little bit about some of the things we're planning to do, like keeping our TIDs open an extra year to help fund some initiatives. And I think that this group is going to be extremely helpful to come up with what's the best use of some of those funds. I'd love to have programs that can help increase home ownership in the city. And I think that when you have areas like North Fishhatchee Road, maybe with that money, we end up buying some properties that come up and deciding to take proposals from builders to put up maybe some townhomes or row houses and really try to change up that mix so it's not all rentals on parts of the city like North Fishhatchee Road. Actually, parts of Allied Drive are similar to that, though they've done some of those things already where they've taken out some rentals. And I think you've seen huge improvements in Allied Drive after some of that as well. So lots of great things. I really appreciate all of your help and expertise on this project. Did I miss anything? Bosses. So I think that's really all I had. But again, thank you very much for your help in this committee. So.
Great, thank you. Then the next item on the agenda is a quick introduction, and so we'll just go around the room and get familiar with who everyone is, and maybe if you want to just give us a little bit of background. You're all here because you have a specific expertise that we want to tap, so if you want to share that, that'd be great. So I'm Joyce Fry, I'm the Economic Development Specialist, and I'm going to be the staff liaison for this committee.
Mike Zimmerman, Economic Development Director for the City of Fitchburg.
Mallory Gorman, I work for Baker Tilly, which is a financial advisory firm. I work in construction real estate, specifically with regards to credits and incentives for developers.
I'm Dorothy Krause. I've been on the Fitchburg City Council since 2011. I've also been on the county board since 12. I represent the north swath of Fitchburg in both seats. Both of them are majority minority with a lot of concentrated poverty. And I'm very concerned about the folks that are living up there. One of the things I'm concerned about is gentrification and ending up pushing people out that deserve somewhere to live in Fitchburg. So I want to find ways to keep them in the city and help them improve, and as we improve their neighborhoods.
My name is Godwin Amagashi. I have a small consulting business. I'm retired from state service. For several years, I sat on the state architectural and engineering selection committee when I worked for the Department of Administration. In fact, I was a policy advisor in the division of facilities development, so I think I have a good perspective of what we want to do in Fitchburg. My hope is that we'll try to try any good idea and make sure that we leapfrog over most of the communities around Fitchburg.
I'm Brian Schimming. I just passed Chief Operating Officer of WHEDA, the Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority. And I served under Governor Walker, and I served on their board under Governor Thompson and Governor McCallum, former head of the State Division of Housing, which operates a lot of the federal formula homelessness programs, and at the Department of Administration. I've lived in Fitchburg over 20 years.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Clary. I am a Fitchburg resident in District 2, and I also own an appraisal company of my own and do real estate with Realty Executives right off Seminole. I sit on this CETA committee as well, and I'm excited about bringing it out here.
Stonecrest Apartments. My name is Adrienne Walford, and so I've managed that property over there in Fitchburg, and been there since 2009. So, yeah.
My name's Olivia Perry. Is this on? My name's Olivia Perry. It's nice to see all of you. Haven't seen you in a while, Godwin. I know you from the Revolving Loan Fund from Dane County. I'm a senior planner in the Dane County Planning and Development Department, and I run a regional housing initiative called the Dane County Housing Initiative, and I provide technical assistance to communities around Dane County, around affordable housing, and a bunch of other different programming opportunities. Dane County Housing Summit. We have a newsletter, and we bring together a steering committee every month made up of private and public sector stakeholders to discuss housing and the future of housing in Dane County.
Brian McKee. I am a lifelong resident of Fitchburg, live out in District 4. I am also a builder and developer. I have Midwest Homes, custom single-family home builder, and then McKee Associates is our commercial construction and development company. So we do a little bit of multifamily, a little bit of custom single-family homes across many of the markets around Madison, about a 60-mile radius of Madison for residential work. And so I'm here to help out the committee.
Great, well, thank you all for coming tonight. Our next order of business is election of chair and vice chair. So I'll take any nominations from the floor on a vice chair.
Vice chair first?
Oh, you can.
Yeah.
Go ahead. We'll do chair first. How's that?
I'm looking at Olivia for chair.
I'm looking at Godwin for chair.
I think Olivia's a good choice, I think so.
So do either of you accept?
Sure. If
Thank
that's what
you.
you,
Olivia.
unless someone else would like to.
No, Olivia, that's good. We're-
Well, are you making that as a motion,
Yes.
whomever?
Say yes.
Yes.
And I second the motion, so let's yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll take a vote on that. Olivia for chair.
Aye.
Okay. And then a motion for vice chair.
Now we pick on Godwin?
No, I'll tell you why.
Okay. Declines.
I'm sure you're honest. I'm sure you don't want this. We know you.
I'm willing to throw my hat in if others don't want
Or
to.
Mallory, do you want to? What? Brian said you could.
No, I'd rather just participate.
Any volunteers?
Sure.
All right.
Great.
All right.
Thank you very much.
So we have Olivia. And do we have a second for Mallory for chair?
For vice chair.
Oh, excuse me, for vice chair. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
We'll
carries.
run campaigns.
Yeah.
So we're gonna just move around a little bit here because we have Jason Valerius. He is the consultant who worked on our housing plan along with urban assets, and he's gonna provide a brief overview of how we got to where we're at, and then Mike and I are gonna kind of tag team with him after he's done with his kind of discussion and take you back a few steps, but go ahead, the floor is yours.
Sure. So, it's been, what, about a year, a little more than a year since we finished this up, and we've been working on it for like a year and a half. And so, as I look back through this to, before I came over, I was looking at some of the numbers in here and thinking, wow, some of these feel pretty dated already. You know, some things have changed quite a bit just in the last few years. So, I guess let me just take a step back and say that, you know, when we got involved and were asked to, you know, selected to help with the plan, the first thing we did was dive into the data. And what jumped out, and the thing that is kind of the core story about Fitchburg from a housing perspective that we talked about during the process, and that I've talked about in other communities when talking about Fitchburg as one, you know, as a story, one of my stories, is the kind of the bifurcation of the housing market. So you've got this very high, relatively high cost owner-occupied market and a relatively affordable renter-occupied market or renter market. And so I think one of the key themes running through the process and through the plan is building in other rungs on the ladder, so to speak, between the two, or having more choices. And so when you look through the plan, I think the executive summary in the first few pages is a pretty good just reference point for everything that goes after it. And on page 6, so what Joyce had included in your packet was the action plan, kind of a year-by-year action plan. But if you bring up the entire document and you look at page 6 is kind of a synopsis of goals and strategies. And so we've got 9 of them listed, and really it gets to, you need to work on everything everywhere is sort of what it says, but it talks about the need for specifically for owner-occupied housing with attention to the lower end or the more affordable end of the market. So when I say some of the numbers feel dated, I look back at the fact that we're saying that that end of that market, the owner-occupied market, is top-heavy. It's relatively expensive. And what is really needed is ownership units in the $174,000 to $217,000 range. And you know, the conversations I've been having with people in the past year, that feels very low, even for attached unit, you know, townhomes. So you know, I'm not sure about the validity of that particular number, but the point there that affordable owner-occupied housing is important is spot on, and the need for attached unit housing as a strategy for that, I think, still resonates. And then, you know, looking further down the list, the importance of attention to to rental units, the renter market, investment and reinvestment in existing properties is part of the picture, making sure that the stock that's available right now doesn't fall into kind of a spiral of disrepair and problems that can occur with that in terms of safety and tenant mix, but also that there be kind of a range of unit price points for rental housing. I think as we're working on this plan, we're seeing more of that come online. So as compared to when this project was conceived, there is more high-end rental housing, which is a good thing, I think, to be part of the market. But there will continue to be a need for a range of housing and for affordable rental housing that is also quality housing. So bringing to bear the you know, tax credit tools, financial tools, the housing authority as a means of getting to units that are both good quality and affordable is going to be important. When you know, I've been very encouraged to see the progress and to see you guys come together and meet and be created. From my perspective, the most important role of this body is to kind of be the control lever on the financial tools that the city has. So the city hasn't done much in the past to fund housing, And this is really the mechanism. You guys are going to be advising the creation and the use of funding. I think there'll be lots of other ways that you get engaged on questions and issues related to housing. You're going to become kind of the go-to local experts for the city. But it's first and foremost the funding questions that I think you're going to be utilized. So that's some of what I see as highlights of you know, the data and the recommendations and the opportunity moving forward.
Does anyone have any questions
Yes, I
for
do.
Jason?
I have a couple of questions, really. I read your piece. Thanks for sending it early, Joyce. And one of the things that sort of, created a little discomfort to me is that you mentioned that development in Fitchburg, because of land and some of the pricing that we do, we were higher than all the communities around us. And so in the back of my mind, I was saying to myself, we probably want to be we don't want to be on the bleeding edge, so to speak. And so maybe the people from the city can tell me why we are the most expensive place to develop a property. Why did we get into that as the way to encourage people to come into Fitchburg? One of the things you did not take into consideration, obviously, was the fact that our city will be expanding soon with the annexation of parts of the town of Madison. So from my perspective, we happen to be at a hub for what I consider the greater Madison area. We've got a lot of land, et cetera. So maybe this is a time to think in the context of trying to sell ourselves as the place to be. So maybe you can help me on how we got into the being the most expensive place to develop property.
Well, yeah, I'll take a shot and these guys will jump in. We did do a pretty detailed comparison of the various fees that end up being charged for development here as compared to a bunch of peer communities in the metro area.
Yeah.
And the one that really jumps out as being highest among the peers is the park fees. Fees related to parkland and park improvements. And the plan doesn't say lower fees. The plan says evaluate the fees because the obvious kind of back and forth tug is the investment decisions that were made to say we're going to set relatively high fees, and investing in parks is about being a great place to live. And so that's part of the mix too, is Fitchburg needs to be a great place to live, and investment in parks is one of the key mechanisms for being a great place to live. And so, there's some tension there between affordability and quality. And it could be that the resolution is to allow for waivers on projects that are targeting an affordable price point, so that other projects carry more of that weight, and so kind of redistributing where some of that cost goes.
Okay.
That's one approach. And the other thing might be just to hold off on increasing long enough for all the peers to be going up higher, which has been happening on a regular basis. So even during this process, we were seeing, some of what we were finding was that communities are saying, well, ours are going to increase, at the end of the year or next year. So it isn't necessarily, it's a fluid thing all the time. But you're right that our finding was that Fitchburg was a relatively more expensive place in terms of fees. But that's not the sole factor. I mean, I think that's related to there hadn't been a lot of construction, especially in detached single-unit housing, in the years prior to doing the study, and that played a factor, but by no means the only, and maybe probably not the strongest factor. I think there are some quirks of circumstance that probably factored in more, but yeah.
Yeah, as far as the lack of single-family since the recession, it was primarily driven by that we didn't have new single-family subdivisions platted and through the entitlement process there. It wasn't that there wasn't demand for single-family housing, and now I think that you've seen the new subdivisions come forward. We're back into the 80s and kind of 90s as far as single-family permit construction. After the recession, we were stuck at like 25, 30 annually there, and heavily weighted towards multifamily, you know, at that point in time. With regards to multifamily, you know, I know some people, and even in this plan, it recommends that we continue to bring a healthy annual supply of multifamily. And some people have said, well, why? You know, we've had so many units built since the recession, but we're getting kind of demand from both ends of the demographic spectrum. There you're getting the millennials that are either maybe choosing to rent or aren't quite ready to get into ownership for whatever reasons. There, maybe it's student loan debt and things like that, and maybe delayed household and marriage formation and stuff like that. But then you're also getting kind of the downsizing of some of the baby boomers that maybe don't necessarily want to own anymore. Maybe they want the flexibility that part of the year they're going to go to Florida, you know, everything. And so we've got the two largest generations that are kind of generating that demand. So, and then with population growth, there's still the need for new rental housing units that we need to keep adding to our housing stock and be strategic and, you know, smart about it and everything. With regards to the fees in particular, I think where Jason mentioned on the park fees, it seems like we're higher than our peer communities. And even I think and Joyce, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think it goes back to our 2009 comprehensive plan, where even for the national average, it seems like we're higher on the actual parkland dedication. Right. We're not so high on the park improvement fees necessarily, but we are on the parkland dedication. And I know when we went through this exercise with the housing plan, there was a conversation of, you know, should we somehow have a conversation, obviously, based on if the elected officials direct us to, and it would involve the Parks Commission and Finance and everything, of should you kind of, let's say, right that balance, you know, there between how much land dedication we're requiring. We're, to be candid, we're having a little challenge right now taking care of the parkland that we have from just a maintenance standpoint and staffing, you know, for it. But that might be a future conversation that maybe is out there, but we'll get the direction from the elected officials as far as what they want us to look at in that regard. Does that answer your
question?
It does.
I mean, from my perspective, I figured if you're trying to sell something, you don't want to be the most expensive shop, so to speak. I mean, you like to compete with a lot of the other communities around here. Some Prairie is doing very well. I think Oregon is, you know, picked up a little, but I thought if we had a fee structure that made it easy for people to take a second look at us, that's a good sales point from our perspective.
From a single-family standpoint, one thing that came up in the CETA and the Housing Task Force discussion was, even if we eliminated all fees, which they came in at $8,687 here, from a single-family standpoint, that's probably not going to make or break, you know, somebody getting into homeownership. You know, that's not going to necessarily move the needle enough to probably make that difference. But what we did talk about was in our toolkit in the future, and in 2022 is when we have two of our really large TIF districts that are going to be ready for close. And with that state statute from 2019, where you can keep tax increment districts open one more year and capture that increment that's for affordable housing, if the council is so inclined, and the council has to pass a resolution in 2022 to that effect, they have to do it that year when it's ready to close. If they're so inclined, and if this group is so inclined to offer a recommendation to encourage them to do that, and they do it, we will probably capitalize $7 million into our affordable housing fund, which gives us some real dollars to be able to work with. And so our hope is with this group is you know, you have an action item tonight, working with a partner possibly at the Dane County Housing Authority, but we're hoping maybe between now and 2022, you're the group that helps to put together what are the recommendations of how we would use those programs and those resources to develop programs and strategies, you know, to accomplish a lot of the goals that are identified in here. And on the single family front in particular, maybe we can't move the needle so much through fees here, but is there maybe an area where we would do like a land trust or a land bank where we would look to take the land out of the equation.
Yeah.
We did a little bit of that historically back in, and it wasn't so much a trust, it was a land write-down with the help of Dane County CDBG. And that's how we had 600,000, I think it was, that helped with the land write-down of Belmar Hills, which is the renaissance on the park development that allowed us to get more entry-level workforce priced single-family. I think when those homes, and this was some years ago, but when they came online, they were at like 150 and 160. Yeah. But we worked with Tom Ellison on that development. So that was an example where we did try to do something. You know, we haven't had a toolkit to be able to do much, whereas now with these TIDs that are potentially closing, that's going to give us some good resources to work with, and we want to, again, be kind of strategic of what are those programs and how do they help us accomplish the goals here.
One difference with the Ellison project is they built the largest possible homes on the smallest possible lots to help make them far more affordable. And I think that is a way that I want to go, to keep putting big houses on big lots. I think there might be some interest, but I don't know that there's enough interest, and I don't know that that is affordable enough. So my grader will be smaller lot sizes with big family houses.
I would also note that I think the more difficult unit types to build, the missing middle housing, attached unit housing of various types, both ownership, so typically row homes, townhomes, or rental housing in smaller structures is the kind of thing that is needed everywhere, and it would be fantastic for you guys to have a voice in figuring out how that actually happens here. And the development community needs to be part of that conversation. I think lenders need to be part of that conversation to figure out how to get there.
One last question. I know you're a developer, and after I read I made a 2-page notes for this after I read your presentation. I'm sorry I didn't bring it. But as a developer, one of the things that occurred to me was that, for example, there's a new development not too far from where I live on Seminole and Lacey Road, and there's a sign out there that says housing 300,000 plus. That obviously,
Starter homes.
well, that's starter homes. But my point is that something like that drives a lot of people out of the market because, gee, I don't want to start with $300,000. Now, if, for example, there was a piece of property, or say the city did something, and housing was put in the range that he talked about, 174,000 to about 250,000, is that a disadvantage in terms of selling those kinds of houses? You're a developer.
Well,
That's what we're looking for. That's how you get affordable housing.
I think it kind of starts, we can open up a big can of worms here, but it kind of starts with the amount of land that's available to develop.
Okay.
Well, our comprehensive plan includes, and I don't remember the exact number of acreage,
It's like 1,100.
1,100, but of that 1,100, if you actually do the math of what's developable and what owners within that 1,100, if they're willing to sell or not, because you have the Promegas, you have the Sub-Zeros, you have Hartung Brothers Seed, none of those people are gonna do anything for development for residential. Like the Hartung Brothers, there's 200 and some acres that are included in the comprehensive plan as developable land, but they don't have any plans and don't wanna sell and don't wanna do anything. So the fact that the city included that land in the comprehensive plan is kind of a false number in the real world. And doing the math, there's probably really only about 500 acres of the 1,100 that's developable. That could be for residential or even commercial outside of their individual owners. So there's not a real free market over the 10 years, yeah, of the comp plan. So there's, while they say there's an absorption rate of 70-some acres per year, I think in the plan, when you look at, there's really only 500 or 550 acres, there's actually half of that, each year, 34 acres to develop. When you limit the amount of land that's available to develop, guess what happens? The price of that land goes right through the roof. And so when you look at that neighborhood over off of Seminole and Lacey, the raw land price that was paid for that, which is because the market was restricted on what was available, it increased the cost of the land so high that then you're forced to build more expensive houses on it.
Okay.
The old rule of thumb from, I don't care what generation you come from, was the lot should be about 25% of the cost of the overall housing project. So if you have a $50,000 lot, you could have a $250,000 house. But when you have lots that are $150,000, and that's 25%, well, guess what? Your house price is gonna be roughly 600. It's just how the math works out for appraisals and everything else. So there's a lot more involved with the land restriction as far as the development goes. The other thing as far as fees, and Mike touched on this, but the other part of development that needs to be looked at is the street requirements. You know, Fitchburg has had a reputation in the development world for requiring the most extensive width of streets rather than narrower streets. And so when you have to take more land towards that street versus towards lots or towards parkland, it affects the overall economics of the subdivision. So you're putting in more blacktop, more curb and gutter lengthwise and widthwise. It adds to the cost of the lots that you develop. So there's a lot more that comes into it than just the fees. And so I think when Fitchburg is looking at the overall policy of housing, they need to look at how they develop, not just from fee structure, but from the streets and the dedications and stuff, because all of that adds into the component of affordable housing, or affordability of housing. Those terms get interjected quite often.
The one neighborhood where it's probably the most, I wouldn't say it's entry level, but it's the most affordable as you can get in Fitchburg right now with new construction are over along the Siding Road corridor where Viridian did the new subdivision. And that falls under our smart code zoning and has some of that, what would you say, kind of development parameters, flexibility with the narrower streets, the smaller lots, you know, and things like that. Those homes are kind of starting at 320, you know, I would say if you go.
That's still high.
Yeah, but that's where we're stuck right now. That's the most affordable new construction in Fitchburg. So you can see from the numbers that Jason said, we're probably out of date, you know, here as far as time. But there's that somewhere in the middle. It seems like we need to figure out how do we try and move the needle on new single-family, you know, home construction affordability. And that's why we'll be relying on this group and expertise to help us identify those strategies of how to do that.
How
Yeah,
does it factor in that, because mortgages that people are paying are low in the homes they're living in now, particularly in the true middle income homes like in Belmar, those people aren't moving. They're not making those hand-me-down homes available to other people that are looking for a home that would be affordable. Most people getting into the car market start with a used car. I think that's probably true also of homes, but are used homes available to people who want, or are people staying in the homes that they're in now and not moving into one of these newer ones? And, go ahead.
Well, I think one of the answers to that is just how society is in general. We raise our kids in homes that probably have more amenities than what we grew up in. And so it steps up the level of what their expectation is. And that's why you see in some of the apartment markets right now, apartments are granite countertops and they're tile floors, not vinyl floors. And so we're raising that expectation. And so now the millennials that are coming into the market, they haven't lived in that used house. The house they grew up in is one that had granite countertops and one that had tile floors. And so that's what their expectation is. They want to skip that first level and they want everything to be the nicer product. That's part of where the market is right now. I mean,
Everyone wants granite countertops, beautiful home, updated 250, big lot, mature.
yeah,
It's not realistic.
yeah.
I mean, it's not just Fitchburg that's overpriced. I mean, we're pointing Fitchburg because we're here at this meeting, but it's everywhere. Everywhere in Dane County, it's not, this is a second home for millennials unless you're looking to be house rich. And now the society is driving us to be more adventurous and be in tiny homes and be more travel friendly. And I mean, there is this shift now to go into condos. I mean, Epic, they're doing a lot of travel, you know, and a lot of the professionals here aren't looking for the big houses anymore. I'm seeing a big shift to the condo area because people are not having kids as early. People don't need that gigantic space. They want nice, but they don't need a gigantic area. Used is a great idea, but if you come in and the person that's not updated anything, that's not going to appeal to my generation. I mean, because you're going to want to have someone go in there and flip it. Guess what happens there then? The price goes back up.
And I end up, the population again that I'm most interested in is the true low-income population that I would like to see be able to move up into some kind of housing where they have the opportunity to own. They're going to not be terribly unhappy with vinyl and, because many of them are living in now is worse than that in some of the low-income apartment buildings.
So one of the things that I'm seeing around the county is
You don't have to be that close.
oh, okay, is exactly what we're talking about here, this missing middle. And I don't know any community who's been able to tackle this, you know, make the smaller attached condos, because when you're talking about $175 a square foot, we don't see developers building 1,500 square feet, 1,200 square feet attached units, or, yeah, we don't, there's really no, you know, market out there. I mean, there would be a market for it, but we have no suppliers coming forward. And this, you know, so generally what I tell people is that, honestly, rental units, because of the reasons that you mentioned, that they've got everything that a house would have, but they're not homes, appeal to the younger generation, and that seems to be the new starter home, rentals. There just seems to be a place that we've never thought of and heard of before, and no developers stepping into that breach to develop that smaller, single-family attached owner, unless you are.
Well, there's not developers that aren't willing to do that. It's that you can't do it cost effectively. I mean, there's just, the land costs too much, the fees are too much, the street requirements are too much, and, I mean, you just,
Right.
you can't, new construction cannot, and this is not just in Madison or Dane County, I'm on the National Builders Board, and this is a problem nationally, that new construction really cannot be seen as the solution for that missing middle.
Right.
The missing middle is existing housing stock that's out there. And so that's what we need to focus on, is how we can get that market turning over so that those people will move up. And I'm not sure how you do that. And maybe it's just a factor of how we age out as millennials move out of those missing middle homes if they've never moved in 30 or 40 years. Maybe it's when they move out, then that opens up some of that market. Maybe that's why we're seeing this bubble right now too, is that missing middle is probably held by a lot of the aging baby boomer demographic where they haven't moved in 30 or 40 years. They've been sitting in that house, it's paid off, and they're comfortable with that. That's their retirement. And once that baby boomer demographic starts aging out, then maybe we'll see more of that housing stock coming into the market. That's the only way I see filling that middle, that missing middle. 'Cause
Yeah,
new
and
construction can't do it.
And I
It's
think
been
that,
studied and tried in different markets across the country, and it just, you can't hit that price point.
and I think
the
that
cost of redoing it at that point, after somebody's been in it for 30 or 40 years, is, I mean, I can say from a statewide perspective, and I still travel the state quite a bit. I was just up in Polk County this weekend, and is dramatic. I mean, well, to the point about condos, I mean, when Winston and I started a new internal look at weed at condos in the last couple of years, or 3 years ago, and some people were saying crazy, your condos, what are you talking about? And that's why I was interested in your comments about condos, because a lot of people were like off that market for a while. And, but you look at some of the biggest buildings on East Washington Avenue, and we have tax credit units on the back end of the building at $690, $730 a month, and the units on the top floor are $1,900 a month. Well, you know, $1,900 a month, so it's pretty dramatic. I would say too, with respect to, and I don't know where it's at, but the comp plan is that, and I was frankly aghast when they passed the last comp plan, because it was obvious what some of the problems are gonna be. And we're seeing some of that now, and I'm reminded, because I get around the county a lot, usually at least a couple times a week, and it's just sometimes it's just plain and simple supply and demand. And I get your point about the 500 acres or whatever it is that might be available. That is flat out a supply problem that we can sit in this committee meeting for the next 10 years and nothing's gonna work, because you won't get to the issue of that, and it doesn't matter whether it's Fitchburg, Wanakee, McFarland, wherever it is, if we're gonna artificially, I don't wanna say artificially, because I believe in good planning, and I used to have smart growth in my division at DOA, and that's back when smart growth was taking a pretty good beating towards the end there. But part of these issues are pretty fundamental. And if we're gonna, let's take your 500 number, if we're gonna have 500 developable acres over the next 10 years, we might as well gavel this meeting right now. I mean, I think people need to understand what the market looks like. You probably know as well as anybody around the table, you two, what the market looks right now. And I'm not saying, because I'm for good planning, and I've had this meeting with I had intergovernmental relations for the state when I was at DOA. And I think we gotta make sure we have a realistic understanding of what the market is, not jump to the market, but understand what the market really is.
When you mentioned the market, there's so many other things that take place too, as far as workforce shortage,
Yeah.
material supply and demand,
Yeah.
tariffs. We've got the condo issue with the banking regulations changing, where they require 75% pre-sale before you can get financing. So there's so many other issues that we can't, as a committee, address, but collectively, if you can take this back to your groups of your builder group and work collectively on these single issues, maybe we can get some changes that way. And as far as Fitchburg is being unique, when you look at other communities, they have a lot of pre-war homes that are really the starter homes. And people, will start out in that, then they'll move up to something maybe a little bit bigger, and then move into that new construction. We don't have a lot of that either. So we do have some unique challenges that we have to realize that we're not gonna change. And I think one of the really focuses we wanna see is how are we gonna best utilize that funding when those TIFs close? And how we can really get the best bang for our buck and put that money to work in an area where we're gonna be able to help people with home ownership. And one other, this is probably off note, but a few years back, Mike and I had reached out to the Fairways in the Pines to talk about, just check in. And at that time, they had about, 800? What was the number? They had 800 units, but how many units of them were being occupied by Epic people because they just basically wanted a place to store their things because they were traveling? And so those were some of our affordable units that, so we've got a lot of little unique challenges that we can maybe, come up with some solutions, but we're not gonna be able to address everything that we see in the marketplace.
I think one thing communities are doing, and I'm seeing, is because they're faced with this exact same dilemma, is that they're really focusing on developing affordable senior housing, and emphasizing senior housing. Because if you can move from your house, at some point, it's a luxury to be able to age in place. Some people are aging in place, but many people eventually have to leave their homes. And if we're creating a new market for seniors, whether it's moderate, low income, middle income rentals, then I think we're loosening and taking away some of the pressure on the market for people who are trying to enter it. But I do think it's a very interesting opportunity to look at condos. I feel like WIDA used to have something for condos, or would that fit into the scattered site?
It did. Frankly, the product didn't get used for a while. When
Yeah.
the market dropped off, and then, so yeah, you're right.
We might want to revisit that because it's given the intractable nature of the situation we're in, it feels like condos, or even condoizing some of the older apartment units, redeveloping them. So I just want to ask one question because I don't think we got to that, but are you gonna walk us through any of the things that have happened in the action plan so far, or? Okay.
We're gonna kinda,
Great.
we wanted, because Jason needed to leave at 6.
Oh, okay.
We wanted to kinda have him give an overview of the plan, and then we were gonna kinda walk you back how we got to where we're at, if that makes sense.
And if I could just mention one thing on the comp plan, I was just checking in with the mayor back here, because we are in the process of updating our 10-year comp plan, and it's going to be on the council agenda for tomorrow night for consideration, and there's some amendments that will be part of it. But one thing I'll point out is, and I'm going to go off mic here, but if you look at this map, hopefully I speak loud enough that it picks me up on the microphone here. This is the urban service area line here, the pink one. And this line, it's probably a little out of date because it comes over here now. But you can't see it very well, but these hashed neighborhoods here that go down here and here and here, those are called our future urban development areas. So they're outside of the urban service area right now. They would need to go through a neighborhood plan process first. And then once they went through that process, then they can go forward for an urban service area adjustment request through the Capital Area Regional Plan Commission. So right now, the comp plan will be updating kind of inside the urban service area, but I think it's our expectation that we probably will see at least one of these other neighborhoods start to come forward to start that neighborhood plan process probably sooner rather than later. And I think there's also some language in our comp plan that allows us to do not just one major update over that 10-year period, but at least possibly one more. You know, so there is some flexibility, I think, written into this plan that maybe wasn't in the 2009 plan as far as there being some updates. So just wanted to put that out there that, you know, we got the acreage number right now that we're kind of dealing and have available within the urban service area, but there could be the potential to expand that urban service area line to bring in some additional acreage depending on growth and development and absorption of land.
And I would love this group to help take a look at our FUTA, the future urban development areas, and help make tweaks to what that ought to be. Because like Mike said, the council will be able to bring the comp plan forward and do updates within that 10-year period. And I would love this group to be part of that planning.
So Mike, when you pointed at the map, you pointed to a large area in the southeast part of the city that's in the FUTA, but it's not in any way gonna be gravity fed by sewer by any urban service district. So is Fitchburg gonna now start looking at allowing lift stations and that kind of stuff that they've forbidden for the last 60 years?
We've got one
I mean,
now.
that's, so you can point to that map with a FUTA, an area that Fitchburg has never allowed any well and septic subdivisions and hasn't allowed any lift stations in the farther out metro. There's one in the Allied Drive area, but that's it. So when I look at that map, I just kind of laugh and giggle, and that's not really a FUTA, that's just something that's out there to fill in the plan. It's just a waste of time. So that's where I think is Fitchburg actually gonna change its, how it does a development? Is it gonna allow for rural developments in those areas, well and septic? Because it hasn't allowed a well and septic subdivision in 50 years.
Yeah, no, I don't think that will
And if it's gonna be urban service, is the Public Works Department now gonna allow lift stations? Because they haven't allowed a lift station for decades and decades.
You know, one of the things that's interesting about the discussion around here is that, well, we've got a lot of ideas, we've got a lot of problems, etc. It'd be nice to put all on the table, and then one of these days, we'll try to sort the whole thing out, because I think what our committee responsibility is to try to bring the best ideas forward and go from there. You know, I mean, let me just again go back to you. I recall when I read the report from MSC, I said to myself, if we had a developer and said, we want you to develop homes not in excess of $250,000, is that a doable proposition? You tell me.
If the land is free,
Yes.
and
If
the land is
available.
No, I said free.
No,
I didn't
go
say
ahead.
available, because
Okay.
I have some land in Fitchburg that's been, as Mike knows, in question for many years. I had graduate students at the University of Wisconsin tried to come up with a plan for this area where they were looking at trying to hit the middle market, that 240 or less price point for single-family or attached condo houses. And what they came back was that single-family, there's a need for TIF money, which for single-family in order to hit that price point. Well, Fitchburg has a policy where they're not going to do TIF money for single-family housing. So, you know, is that something that we can throw on the table that we need to get out there? That, hey, let's put TIF money out there for single-family housing in order to hit this price point. Is that something that this group should discuss? Maybe it is.
Are there state rules related to TIF for residential?
No, there are a number of communities in Dane County right now who are using
Okay.
TIF for single-family subdivisions, brand-new subdivisions. Maybe we should.
So,
Yeah.
to answer your question, you know, yeah, a developer can build a house for, if, you know, at 175,000, it'd have to be a smaller house, obviously, you know, 1,000 square foot, 1,200 square foot, you'd be below 200, and if the land was 30 or 40, you know, with the permit costs and stuff, yeah, you could probably do something at 250, but the land would have to be free or very inexpensive, and the fees and stuff would have to get massaged in order to try to hit that price point. It's not that developers don't want to do it, it's just that they can't hit that price point.
And a lot of communities are talking about this as well, and talking about land purchasing as a solution.
Yeah, that's one solution.
I would just say, even though we maybe, there maybe isn't support to use current TIF for single-family housing, I think the dollars that might be available to us coming in 2020, I think it's fair to say maybe the elected officials are more inclined to utilize those dollars for something like that. So that's where we'd like to get the expertise from this group of how could we strategically use some of those dollars to maybe do something on that land price side of the equation, you know, there. I think the challenge for us, just philosophically and economically, as far as an existing TIF district, is there's still a cost to service those residential units and everything. So it's a little more challenging to kind of, you know, make the economics of a TIF district work and balance it with the general revenue fund needs of servicing those areas. That's why we're hoping to get these significant dollars to at least do some things, and hopefully there will be future TID districts, you know, that continues to kind of recapitalize, you know, that fund. So it's a new area for us, but that's where we're kind of getting direction from, you know, at this point in time from the policymakers.
I just want to say one final thing. Are you all aware of the new housing legislation that's been moving through the Wisconsin legislature? SB 811 and Assembly Bill 859. I was at the Senate hearing, the House passed it. They thought it might get to the floor. It did not get to the floor. They were waiting for a fiscal impact analysis, but I have a feeling it looks very promising to be passed in the next legislative session. It extends the TIF district allowability from 1 to 3 years. And so that could potentially have an impact on the decisions that you're making or we're making in Fitchburg. There are a number of other opportunities, workforce housing initiatives within that bill as well. But.
And that's a balance there, because I've already kind of, let's say, taken the temperature on, you know, if let's say that would get passed and they would extend it to 3 years. My sense is that we're lucky to get the 1 year, because in an era of levy limits at the state, as council people like Dorothy are trying to make budgets and the mayor are trying to make numbers work, they see that pool of resources in the TID district, and as they struggle to look at transit, you know, and those types of things, and where do they get resources from? I think here in Fitchburg anyway, we would be hard pressed to probably get support to go beyond a year, just because there's so many other needs that are on the table from the general revenue fund. Is maybe that'll change, but that's my early sense, you know, on it. So I'm just, when Ellers, our financial advisors, made us aware of the 1 year extension in 2009, we were just waiting for a TID district to close, where we could start to do something, you know, and put something in our toolkit. And maybe that's a precursor to the slides that Joyce has to cover some things here. But we're just hoping that in 2022, when those districts are ready to close, that the council, decides to use that year, so we at least, hopefully bank 7 million to have something to start with, there.
Good idea.
And I can pretty much say both from city and county perspective, our budgets are on a starvation diet, and it's really difficult to say no to stuff that people really ought to do regardless of. So I hate the fact that we can't do even everything that we have to do. We end up having to decide between gotta haves, and we don't even hardly consider wanna haves. So I would love to change that so that we have a little bit of money that we can actually play with.
So we're just gonna kind of go through a little bit of the background of how we got to where we're at today. So one of the things we did was capitalize that TIF district in 2017. It was TID number 7. I already lost my presentation here. So this is kind of an overview. So 2009, the comprehensive plan set out the goals for the housing goals. In 2014, the city did a housing assessment, kind of getting an idea of what the makeup of the committee, or what the makeup of our community was as far as ages, conditions, qualities. 2017, we capitalized our TID district. 2018, we formed our task force, which some of you served on our task force. We had 58 members on that task force, everybody from housing development to nonprofits that provided housing for low-income people, to bankers, to real estate professionals that really worked with us to talk about what really we needed to focus our attention on. And in 2019, our plan was approved. So
Can I just mention one thing on that previous slide? Joyce mentioned the housing assessment there. And just to reiterate the budget consideration, probably for 2 or 3 years, we had put in the budget back in the day, I think it was it $30,000 or something like that, to try and have a housing assessment done. And every year it was taken out of the budget because there were other needs, as Dorothy pointed out, to take a look at. And the only way we were able to get the housing assessment done was our planning department annually has an intern that they bring in. So we worked with the planning department to have an intern one year actually do that snapshot in time housing assessment, for us. So it just goes to show you again the resources that are there. So that's why this program that Joyce will just talk about now with TID number 7 here is some much needed resources, for us to focus on housing.
actually, I'm gonna just make a little correction there. So we actually reached out in 2008, shortly after I started working for you, to the University of Wisconsin, to Kurt
That's right.
Paulson's group, to get some figures to maybe have one of their real estate classes, to put together something, and that's really when it started. So it was another 6 years later before we actually convinced our elected officials that it was important that we needed to do something. So this is just an overview of how the TIF was capitalized and then what increment was captured. And according to the TID statute for keeping that open, 75% of the funds needed to go for affordability and 25% for housing in general. So you can see we started out with a little less than $100,000. That's how we paid for our affordable housing study. That was 30, or was it 40?
I think it got closer to 40.
40. And then, so we do have some funds. That's how we're gonna work with you guys on paying for your expertise. So we appreciate that. And
You
then
mean the
hopefully-
MSA report, is that what you're talking about,
Yeah.
the
What's
40,000?
that?
The MSA report.
Yes, for our plan.
And just the history on that TID there, that was a very small TID geographically. We wanted to go larger, but the Joint Review Board kind of made us go smaller in that area. But we captured the increment. This is where, because we don't have a lot in our toolkit, we had to get creative there. So we didn't give any money to Park Bank for them to do that headquarters building that's up there on the left there. But we captured the increment from their new project to give us resources to, we did things like burying the power lines up there to try and freshen the streetscape of that older section of Fitchburg that developed when we were still a town. We did the median improvements there, and the hope was, by us at least freshening things up a little bit, that would result in the private sector making some investments up there. Because back when we did this, the Fitchburg Ridge Shopping Center was 80% vacant. And that's when we started to send a message, and we worked with Wisconsin Dialysis and UW Health to anchor that, which led to the facelift. You know, it's now 90-some%, full. McDonald's did a facelift, Popeyes did a facelift, Associated Bank did. So we got some facelifts up there. We never got the full-scale redevelopment that now we're focused on with the new TID district that we just created up there. But this is where we've tried to be as creative as we can be within the tools that are available, to us to try and get some things done.
Interesting.
And this is just an overview of some of the people that worked on here on the task force, which we got a lot of great feedback from MSA for putting this group together. They had really never had anything quite like this before, and really appreciated it, and I think they'll suggest a model like this moving forward. And so I guess we're at our 2019 implementation. So we did get the ordinance passed with the support of the mayor. And now our first order of business is to actually work with the Dane County Housing Authority on the resolution. And then we just wanted to highlight some of the projects that have taken place in the city and the soon-to-be city of Fitchburg in 2020. So we were able to do the affordable housing for the senior project with the assistance from WIDA. So again, we thank you, Brian, for your interest and your help with that project. And then we have the senior housing project over at the Novation campus in the town of Madison, which is another great project. Filled up right away, which we know that there's a huge demand. I think our number is about 580 units that we need by 2030 to look at our aging population, which is probably on the low end of, based on what we're hearing from our senior center and some of our constituents.
And with those,
Just out of curiosity, there's some new development around innovation right now. I think they're in the town of Madison. I'm assuming, Mike, that you are liaising with this?
yeah, and that'll be on the next slide. We'll get to that project. I just want to comment on this slide here. Not only were they the Section 42 tax credits that Brian was very instrumental in directing resources through WIDA to these projects here. In the Plesco project, we also have dollars in there from tax increment district number 10, which is the new big geographic area of TID 10 up on North Fish Hatchery Road. I think what we learned in that exercise going through the pro forma with our financial advisors, we have $3 million in this project here through TID. Our council has kind of given us the parameters that they would like us to be at kind of either 10% of the construction costs, or in the case of an income-based project, we probably need to be at 10% of the net valuation. So even though this project is going to be $30 million in construction costs, we're going to net in valuation probably $12 million on an income-based project. So the council's kind of given us our marching orders and parameters that they want us to be, first of all, developer bond pay-as-you-go financing. They want us to be at probably in an income-based project, 10% of the valuation, and then they want a 15-year payback or less. This one, the council, because they really wanted to get something going on Fish Hatchery Road, They were willing to go beyond that, and it's 3 million. Where we should have been if we were trying to meet the council's parameters, we should have been in for 1.5 million here. So this was kind of one of our first exercises here, that we learned that if we're gonna be approaching deals like this in the future, we're gonna need to think further out a little bit with the developer, that they're gonna have to go for some other sources of funds to fill that other half of what we're not gonna be able to fill under the parameters the council's given us. So it could be the Dane County Housing Fund, it could be the Federal Home Loan Bank, you know, or other entities that are out there. So that's just a learning situation that we had there. And then with the Novation campus, there's a current Town of Madison TID that's open, and the town dissolves in October of 2022, and this area comes to Fitchburg. What we did with them was we allowed them to capture the increment from this project. It opened in, as you see there, 2019. So the increment between 2019 to 2022 is the stream that they get to capture for that project. And what was interesting about this one was, it was around the time of the presidential election there in 2000, was it 16?
16.
Yeah, and when the new administration came in, you know, they changed the tax rates and things like that. Well, all of a sudden, the gap for their project got bigger because of what they were pricing the credits at in the modern market and everything. So the gap doubled, you know, there. And we told them, well, we've only got so much, again, increment that we can allocate towards it based on the TID closing in 2022 when it comes to Fitchburg. So these guys, to make this project still work, they went to the Federal Home Loan Bank to fill out the remainder of that gap that came about there. So that's how we've been working with the private sector to try and get some of these projects done, even while we're still waiting to kind of build our toolkit. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, for
Sure.
that explanation. And then we have two affordable workforce housing projects. The one on the left, the Artisan Village, is the one that you can see from Highway 14. And then we also have the Lime Ridge Apartments, which is approved, and they're working on filling their gap right now. You're aware of that project, Godwin. Thank you for the CDBG funding for that. So we hope to see that one breaking ground soon.
They're waiting to hear on their WIDA tax credit application
What
for
did
that one.
CDBG put into it?
I want to say
Yeah,
400.
but they 400,000.
Yes.
But even Novation as well, we put in 300,000 on Novation. That's on the count of CDBG. And so we'll see more of Joyce and Michael going forward. So that's-
I think the Limestone Ridge one is a great example of a strategic kind of location
Yes.
for workforce housing, because it's in an area that's a mixed-use development where there are employment opportunities, and we also have transit there. So, we're not, let's say, building affordable housing in an area where there's not transit accessibility and then people are isolated, and you're kind of chasing transit after, neighborhoods where people need transit, even more so than other areas, in the city. So this one, really, everything kind of aligned to make a lot, just very common sense,
The
location.
proximity to Verona was also a real plus, because you're talking
Mhm.
about the young people from Epic. This isn't
Yeah.
too far in terms of getting to Verona, so it's very strategic.
The other thing about these, and Brian can attest to this, with some of these projects, we're shooting for that kind of blend of 60% of Dane County median income. So I think WIDA updated their guidelines a couple of years ago where it could be that blend. So you can go from 30 to 80, but you need to average 60% of Dane County median income for some of these tax credit projects. And you can probably speak to that too.
Now, doesn't income averaging reduce the requirement, the time requirement that they have to be part of the program?
I don't know if we did I don't know if we did it, but you would think income averaging it.
I just feel like income averaging changes the program requirements for the developers to maintain,
The affordability.
Affordable.
yeah, the
Okay.
affordability.
Right,
And that's,
the total.
I'm kind of, but let's check on that, because it's a
Mhm.
gives great flexibility, but if it takes 15 years out of your affordability,
Yeah,
that-
that's,
it doesn't feel like a win.
Yeah.
Right?
And I just wanted to see if you guys would be okay with moving to agenda item number 7.
Yes.
Since we have Mr. Dick here, I don't want to make him sit here all
Yes,
night as
yes,
we go
yes.
back through. So is there any objections to moving to agenda item 7?
No, ma'am.
Okay, great. So Rob, if you want to come up, we'll get you.
I would just chime in that this is one of the action items identified in the housing plan that was adopted in February of 2019. So that's why we have Rob here today. Everything always takes a little longer than you first anticipate, so we're already in 2020. Still working on some 19 action items.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Rob Dick. I'm the director of the Dane County Housing Authority. As was pointed out, one of the items that was highlighted in the housing study was to pass a resolution authorizing the Dane County Housing Authority to operate in the city of Fitchburg. Little backstory, housing authorities in Wisconsin are created under state statutes, and they can be created either at the state level, like WIDA, at the county level, or at the municipal level. When housing authorities are created at the county level, in order for them to undertake a housing project within a municipality, that municipality must pass a resolution declaring that there is a need for the housing authority to operate and authorizing it to use its powers within the municipality. When the housing authority was formed in 1972 by the Dane County Board of Supervisors, the housing authority went to primarily the cities at the time and got those resolutions passed. Fitchburg, of course, was a town, and nobody really kept up with it. So a resolution was never obtained. So in order for the housing authority to buy a single-family home in the city of Fitchburg, build an apartment building, anything that would be constituted as a housing project, we need that resolution in order to do that. A little more about the housing authority. We are again created by Dane County Board of Supervisors. Our board is appointed by the county executive, and we do report to the Health and Human Needs Subcommittee of the county board. Our mission is to promote and ensure decent and affordable housing for our participants, as well as provide owners and developers with an opportunity to rehabilitate and develop affordable housing. And I'll get into how we go about doing that as we go along. The main programs that we operate are the two big HUD programs, the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. We currently have an allocation of 1,276 vouchers with an $8.4 million annual budget for housing assistance payments. So that's $8.4 million that we're putting into Dane County, the Dane County economy by making payments to landlords. We also operate the public housing program. We have 86 units in Stoughton, Sun Prairie, Monona, and Mays-Maney. Again, that's financed through HUD, and they're not the public housing that many people envision when they think of large public housing developments. Our biggest public housing building is a 14-unit in Stoughton, but better than half of our public housing is either single-family homes or duplexes, and you drive by them all the time, and they look like every other single-family home and duplex. So we also operate USDA rural development housing. We currently have 16 units in Cross Plains, 23 in Stoughton, 23 in Verona, and 8 in DeForest. They work very similar to HUD programs. We're renting to individuals and families at or below 50% of county median income, and they are paying 30% of their income towards rent and utilities, with USDA making up the balance. We also have low-income housing tax credit, Section 42 developments. We have 20 units in Belleville, 16 units in Mays-Maney, and 54 of our USDA rural development units also are layered with 4% tax credits. And then finally, we have a conventional housing portfolio. This is just what we like to refer as naturally occurring affordable housing that we purchased. A lot of times it's small 4, 8 unit buildings. The largest though is 2 24-unit buildings in the village of Marshall. And these have no subsidy. We just are prioritizing the rental to families at or below 60% of county median income, and self-restricting the rents at the HUD published fair market rent. And those are located Sun Prairie, Burke, Mount Hora, Black Earth, and Marshall. So we are all
Wait, are
over
these,
the
are
place.
those single family or those,
No, those are all multifamily. The smallest is a 4-unit, and then again, the largest is a 24. I put together a little bit of data for you, because everybody loves data, right? Talking a little bit about housing need. I'm sure many of you are aware that the rental market in our area is extremely tight. Economists say that a vacancy rate somewhere between 5 and 7% is healthy. That means that neither the landlord or the tenant has much of an advantage. But our vacancy rate has been below 3% for years. Actually, it's come up a little bit because we were as low as 2.2, I believe, on the average. I do have some municipalities on the right there that have some breakdown. Fitchburg at 2.27, so that is incredibly low. Fair market rents have increased by 63% since 2000, while income has only increased by 55%. So as we know, rents are going up, income is not going up as fast. That makes affording housing more difficult year by year.
and I think it's important to note that lower income folks, their wages are not going up as
Sure.
fast
Right.
as median or upper income folks, so that makes the gap even bigger.
Absolutely.
And they,
Yep.
they have problems with the state having rewritten laws that allow landlords to cherry pick and eliminate them from consideration for housing.
Absolutely. And then the number of very low and extremely low income renter households in Fitchburg has increased by 84% from 2010 to 2015. So that's a big jump. Number of rental units in affordable to those households has increased by just 36% over that same time period. So these stats, I've got the references down in the corner there, but the vast majority of those are coming from Kurt Paulson's Dane County Affordable Housing Needs Assessment Report, as well as the update. But according to the report, when we're looking at the number of affordable housing units for families between 0 and 50% of county median income, and the number of families between 0 and 50% of county median income who are current residents of Fitchburg. Okay, so residents that are living here between 0 and 50% AMI, there is a gap of 1,055 affordable units.
Wow.
So there are 1,055 more low-income families that are residents of Fitchburg than there are rental units affordable to them.
So I just want to make sure everyone understands what a housing gap means, right? Because obviously they're here, but the gap is, I mean, and they're in housing that's more expensive than they can afford. So the gap, while we need more houses or housing units that people who are lower income and, 60% or below the area median income, the gap is actually real and physical right now because these people are paying 50% of their income or more on housing, which makes them going without basic necessities. And that's in Fitchburg right now.
Or doubled up, or yes,
Mhm.
correct.
Right.
Yep, and that's a Fitchburg number, yes. So to your point, it doesn't project increased demand.
Correct.
It just talks about current demand. And that is actually based on, the update was based on the 2015 census data. So it actually is likely larger than that now. A little bit about housing supply. As I said, the Dane County Housing Authority has 1,276 vouchers, which we spread out amongst Dane County. The city of Madison also has an allocation of about 1,800 Section 8 vouchers. And so one of the things I had done previously was done a distribution graph of housing choice voucher utilization. So I wanted to update that with current numbers. And obviously you can see the vast majority of all vouchers are in the city of Madison with nearly 2,000. And then next you'd have Sun Prairie and Fitchburg coming in third, and then trailing off with the smaller cities after that, and then the villages.
And Rob, these are just the housing choice, these aren't the place-based or the sticky?
Correct, although there are no project-based Section 8 vouchers in Fitchburg.
Okay.
Is that correct?
There's the one in Madison just over by.
Yes, we have,
That one and-
yes, yeah, correct. Yep, so yes. So Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher participants receive a voucher from the Housing Authority, and they can rent anywhere within the county, or once they are eligible to port out, can move to any jurisdiction within the United States. One of the things that we talked about last time was distribution of affordable housing. So one of the things that I did was to take a look at the number of units affordable for families between 30 and 50% of AMI, and then compare across municipalities. So it's, I don't know how well you can read that chart there, but I adjusted this for population. So actually the municipality that has the most low-income units for its proportional population size is Monona, then Madison, then Stoughton, and then Fitchburg. So Fitchburg is actually fourth among cities for the number of low-income units once adjusted for population. The other finding that I wanted to put out there is that according to the report, we need to create 10,812 affordable units to meet just current demand. So if we could snap our fingers and make 11,000 affordable units tomorrow, we'd be in great shape.
Is there a guess on how many bedrooms you're talking about?
Oh, geez. It's probably 30,000 bedrooms. I mean, if you're just thinking of averaging, large families and
So you're talking
elderly.
3-bedroom units?
On average, I think that's probably maybe a little less than that of 11,000. So maybe somewhere at 2.5, 2 3/4.
So I think this is from the 2015 Housing Needs Assessment, because the 2019 update actually identifies over 15,000, 12,000 renter units and 3,000 single-family units, where residents are extremely cost-burdened, paying more than 50% or more of their income on rent. So we have now over 15,000. So that's up from the 2015 report, I think.
And thank you for that, and that's on 2015 numbers. So it's probably, it could be $20,000 or 20,000 units in real time.
Oh, right, in real time. Yep,
Yep.
correct. But right now, the number we're working off of is over 15,000.
Do we have a guess how census is going to adjust numbers at this point?
No, but I think the problem is you won't even be able to see them for probably till 2023, and then maybe we'll get an update in 2025.
We did our redistricting work based on census numbers in 2011.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Okay.
you'll have those numbers, right.
Okay. All right. I guess the point is we can argue about how big the gap is, but the city of Madison was working really hard to try and create 1,000 units of affordable housing per year, and I think they got to about half of that. So to think that we need somewhere in the neighborhood of 15,000 to 20,000 units as a county is daunting, to say the least. Last thing I have on my little presentation here is just to talk a little bit about resources that the Dane County Housing Authority brings to affordable housing development. Since 2015, we've worked with Section 42 tax credit developers and helped create 525 units of affordable housing in Madison, Middleton, Monona, Sun Prairie, and Wanakee. And you will notice that Fitchburg is not listed there.
That's exactly, that's about.
We do that in many different ways. Sometimes we are a nonprofit sponsor of the tax credit application. Sometimes we are an actual co-developer. We are 20% co-developer with Gorman on their project in Sun Prairie that's just about getting close to open here, which is very exciting. We also pass through grants that for-profit developers can't get to themselves without having a nonprofit involved. And then finally, we do project-based rental assistance in the development. And that is huge because that's actually the last bullet, I skipped ahead. But the big thing about project-based rental assistance is developers get points for skewing units down to the 30% AMI, the extremely low income range. But the problem is that in the tax credit world, they also then have to restrict those rents to what's affordable for someone in that 30% range. And that hurts the income and makes the project sometimes not work. If we can put rental assistance in there, they can get the points for going after those extremely low income units, but our rental assistance can keep the rents at market rate, which means it doesn't hurt the income. So the developer gets the benefit of creating those extremely low income units, but doesn't take the hit on their cash flow. So
Well,
that,
hold on a second.
yes.
Does anybody have a question about that? Because that's, no? Okay.
And I mean, there's also lots of other great reasons to do it. It's very difficult to rent up in Dane County with a Section 8 voucher. We have, the last time we opened our wait list was 2015. Previous to that, it was closed for 7 years. So anybody that's been on that wait list for 5, 7, 13 years and needing rental assistance the whole time and not getting it, I bet their credit report isn't, we had a management company the other day that we heard from that was looking for an 825 credit score to rent an apartment. Right. Okay. So not only that, but with a 3 or sub 3, 2.2% vacancy rate in the city of Fitchburg, there is not enough housing out there that's even available. So then when you have a family that has those income challenges, to try and go up and compete for those units, it's extremely difficult. We allow families 5 months once we issue a voucher to lease up, and 25% of the vouchers we issue come back unused after 5 months of searching for housing. Not only do they not get to utilize that voucher, our wait list is closed, so they can't even get back on. Maybe they'll wait another 5 years until we open it. So by putting this rental assistance on physical units, it helps create supply where those vouchers can be used. 2 other things, I mentioned the grant funds that we can unlock for
Are you limited to the number of units that you can, how many vouchers you can
Yes.
bring? And
Yes,
what
we
is
can only do 30% of our total allocation, so we'll do the math. It's a little over 350. And I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of half of that committed.
Okay. So what is the most number of units you've brought to a project, mixed income?
To any single project?
Yeah.
Well, we put 27 vouchers in the city's permanent supportive project at Rethke Terrace,
Right.
which would be the most we ever put in. Typically on tax credit developments though, we're usually only putting in 8. The reason being is the 9th voucher requires the developer to pay Davis-Bacon wages,
Oh.
and so it's an economic barrier. So it's usually 8 per development.
And Davis-Bacon wages requires the developer to pay living wage and do an incredible amount of paperwork and reporting.
It's more the paperwork than it is the wage.
Then the wage, right, yep.
And most of them are paid
So-
more than that anyway, it's just the reporting part of it that's.
And it's an annual reporting and yeah.
The last thing I just wanted to highlight there, DCHA can also issue double tax exempt bonds for affordable housing creation or rehabilitation. So we have partnered with developers. We've done 2 projects for Madison Development Corporation, and we also did one for Forward Management out in Sun Prairie. And again, issuing the tax exempt bond means that when they go out for financing, their financing is gonna walk and talk like just a regular mortgage, but the interest that the developer pays to the bank is now exempt from state and federal taxes. So the bank can write down the interest rate, knowing they don't have to pay that tax, and then can make the project more affordable. So, so those are some of the tools in the toolkit that we'd like to bring to Fitchburg to help with this affordable housing crisis.
Madam Chair, I see a copy of a resolution. I think it was included in our package.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to apologize on behalf of our fellow citizens for being late to the party. But we're now at the party, so we want to have a resolution out here authorizing the Dane County Housing Authority to function within the city of Fitchburg. If I can obtain a second.
All in favor?
Well,
Let's have this discussion.
Yeah,
Let's have a
right.
discussion first. Well, the first discussion is that the fact that we've been here as a city for more than 30 years and our name doesn't appear on your list is troublesome. Those days are gone. This is a new committee, and we feel we'll be able to work with you. So I've interacted with you before from my other responsibilities. Our hope, obviously, is that now that you've got Fitchburg on your list, we'd like to make sure that you know that we want you here. We want to make sure that we work together. Fitchburg has a lot to offer, and not having been at the party, when we start the music, you will love the party, trust me.
Thank you.
One question that I had from another one of the alders that she's concerned about is properties that are housing authority properties being taken off the tax rolls. Can you speak to whether they all are, whether some of them are, what the city
Sure.
should know about that?
Sure, yeah. According to state statute, property of the housing authority is public benefit and therefore exempt from real estate taxes, well, of all taxes. However, we are allowed to negotiate a payment in lieu of taxes to help cover services from the local municipal government. So, while that doesn't pay the county's portion of the taxes, and it doesn't include the school, the portion for the schools, it does pay for local services.
And we did add that provision to the resolution.
Okay, so all projects that you're involved in?
So not all of them. We do have a few tax credit projects that are not currently exempt from taxes.
Okay.
So, but they're owned by a component unit LLC and are likely not eligible for that exemption.
I guess one thing that I'd like to, if we're gonna consider this resolution, is that last sentence kind of addresses what you're talking about, as far as future payment in lieu of tax agreements. I guess I would like to make sure that if we're gonna adopt this, that we maybe propose an amendment that says something that adds to the end of it equal to the existing city levy or property tax rate, so that it's not
We're not
negotiated
losing.
less than what the tax rate is, it is equal to what the tax rate is.
No, that's right.
Is that something that you see in other communities or that you,
Yeah, and it really depends on the community. For instance, that's what's happening in Marshall. We took the portion of the mill rate that was attributable to municipal services, applied that calculation to come up with a pilot. In some communities, we pay a calculation which is 10% of rent minus utilities, which is actually the HUD required calculation for public housing. In some municipalities, we don't pay a pilot, but we have never, when asked to pay a pilot, said no.
Would requiring you to meet the existing property tax rates, would that be prohibitive for your projects? Or would we see projects that would be
less likely to happen?
I don't, well, I mean, it would be prohibitive in the fact that it impacts cash flow. So if you had a project that you were trying to make affordable, you couldn't make it as affordable as you wanted. Or if a project was right on a tipping point and we were talking about zero property tax as opposed to a pilot that was equal to the municipal portion, it may make it whether or not it would go or not go. So I'm not saying it's a deal breaker, and I have no problem supporting that amendment.
It makes for, I mean, he talked about the cash flow for this program, it also affects the cash flow of the city and what everybody pays in our taxes, so.
That's right.
You know, I think if we're gonna make a program, we should make it so that it's equitable across all boards.
I agree with that.
You know, I'm within that inclined to want to include,
This is it, I made a copy for
school
you.
districts as well.
That's what you were supposed to be reading.
because I hope that there will be many children involved in what we want to do.
And I would say that
might be a future.
the state equalization formula should help correct for properties that are taken off the tax rolls.
Can I ask a question? Did you say, how many single-family homes is the DCHA, did you say?
We have 46 single-family homes and duplex units. So, the number, the breakdown, I think, is 10 straight single-family homes, and then the other, what would that be? I think,
36?
sorry, it's 10 single-family homes and 15 duplexes in our portfolio.
And how, in those areas where you acquired those, how do you go about acquiring those, or what kind of triggers you looking to acquire a single-family home or duplex?
I actually have not, since I've been at the Housing Authority, acquired a single-family home or duplex. They were all acquired back in the late 70s to early 80s. And so I can't speak to how that was done. The smallest property I have developed in my 8 years has been a 4-unit that was actually in foreclosure, that we had to do a bunch of rehab on. But it was a value proposition because it was in foreclosure. So otherwise, and a lot of the smaller properties that we purchased in 13, 14, and 15, when we were still coming out of the economic crisis, and multifamily was still at an affordable price point. Since then, with rates going down and vacancy going down, prices for multifamily housing have gone through the roof. We were purchasing for anywhere from $50,000 to $60,000 a unit in that time, and now you're lucky to find something under $100,000 a unit. So we haven't really done a lot of just naturally occurring affordable housing acquisition in that time. So we've been doing more of acquiring expiring use tax credit properties as a preservation move, as opposed to purchasing outright smaller developments. But to answer your question, I think my real it's opportunity driven. Someone either comes to us with a project that says, hey, this looks like something that might work for affordable housing, or we just find something in the marketplace. Or working with other developers or other nonprofits that have something that they make us aware of.
A partner that Rob mentioned, somebody that we've just been having some quiet conversations with, is the Madison Development Corporation, because they've done some projects around the region here, and we've discussed with Lori that maybe there's some opportunities for partnership and collaboration on some specific projects out here in Fitchburg.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, and I would say in addition to that, we've partnered with Stonehouse Development, Gorman and Company, JT Klein. We've partnered with obviously MDC and Forward on bond issues. Common Bond out of the Twin Cities, MSP Real Estate out of the Twin Cities. I'm going to leave somebody out, but we really have worked with a lot of the bigger tax credit developers and have some really good relationships. So
There's a question in the resolution that has, that the authority intends to notify the city before engaging. What does that notify look like? Is that a
Sure.
monthly report? Is it a quarterly report? I would think that it would be pretty much any time that you're approached by a developer or.
Yeah, I don't think it would be, I think it would be on an as-need basis. So if an opportunity came up in Fitchburg, and there have been lots of opportunities that have come up in Fitchburg. You know, I'm really excited about E.J. Plesko's project on the corner of Traceway and Fish Hatchery, but I can tell you when we were involved in that project, it was a lot more affordable. So, but we were unable to go forward because of this resolution. So the way I think it would happen, we do, by statute, we do have to go before planning before we undertake any project. So even if we were just to purchase an existing single-family home, we'd have to go to planning. So what I would do is if an opportunity came up, start with a conversation, you know, reaching out to Michael or to the mayor's office and say, hey, this is something that we want to look at, and just start going through that process, get it on planning, or even just sit down and have a conversation even before we go to planning to say, hey, is this something that would work? While it's not a requirement in the statutes, one of the things I've said is, I don't want to bring a project to Fitchburg that Fitchburg doesn't like. So, you know, if we have an opportunity to purchase an apartment building or develop or partner on a project, and I come to you and you say, boy, Rob, that's just doesn't fit in you know, our comp plan, it doesn't fit with the surrounding community, or boy, we just don't like developer XYZ. I don't want to do anything that you guys don't want. So I think having those conversations at the front end and getting the temperature of the city, and if it looks like something that is a mutual interest, then bringing it to planning and going from there.
Rob, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
How are the public housing communities faring?
Not good. HUD is
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because here it is, you know, you hear public housing, that's why a lot of people have a problem.
Oh, well,
in the community.
so from that perspective, Congress has been underfunding public housing for decades. Currently, for our public housing portfolio, we get about $520 per unit per month, all in. And that's not enough money to just operate those units, let very well alone make long-term capital improvement. So it's estimated that there's a $50 billion backlog in capital improvement in public housing nationwide. And so HUD and Congress have actually been pretty aggressive to come up with ways to transition units out of the public housing program and onto the Section 8 platform, which is a much more stable funding model. And so we have actually submitted an application to HUD to remove our single-family homes and duplexes from public housing. The way it would work is we would sell those units to our nonprofit component unit for $1, continue to maintain them as affordable housing. HUD would actually issue Section 8 tenant protection vouchers, which we could then project-base right on those units. And my estimates are that will create somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000 in annual revenue increases to the Housing Authority. And then what we'll do is go to WIDA, apply for probably a 4% tax credit application, apply for some grants, and do substantial rehab so we can set those units up for another 30 years of affordability. So, but you know, it's really the problem with public housing. It's a financial problem. You know, we don't have substantial issues with our residents. Our residents are great. We do utilize Wisconsin Management as our management company, and they're doing all the pre-screening background checks and making sure that all the units are in compliance. And while we don't have the money to be doing a lot of updates, they do keep them in good repair. So, yeah.
What is your the DCHA the bond capacity?
It's $10 million a year.
$10 million a year.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
There's one thing. CEDA, our Community and Economic Development Authority, is actually a housing authority. But right now, even if that group wanted to issue bonds for a project, we're not at the capacity to do that because we are bumping up against our debt limit capacity. And if CETA issued those bonds, it counted against our debt capacity limit there. So that's why one of the things that intrigues us about the partnership here is being able to tap into the DCHA bond capacity that could bring us something into our toolkit that right now we're stuck because of some of the legacy projects like 2 new fire stations, reconstruction of Fish Hatchery Road, just some generational projects that are utilizing our capacity.
Lacey Road interchange.
That's very good.
Do we have any more discussion or questions?
But just say the last thing, you know, I know that a lot of times with affordable housing, we think about, you know, new construction, we think about some of the tax credit developments that have been done, some of the ones that are currently being done. But another thing two things that I think are incredibly important, I mentioned preservation. The tax credit program is the way the majority of new affordable housing units are built, but they are for a fixed period of time. Here, the IRS only requires a 15-year compliance period. Here in Wisconsin, we put an additional 15 years on, but 30 years goes by fast. And there are projects that were created here in Dane County or in Wisconsin with tax credits that are expiring out. And I've gotten calls from seniors in projects where they're getting letters from their landlord saying, hey, guess what? Your rent's going up to market rate because we're no longer in this program. So, you know, if we need to create 15,000 or 20,000 affordable units, that's if we preserve 100% of our expiring units. So that's one place where I think that the Dane County Housing Authority can really help by being a backstop and making sure we don't lose our existing affordable housing. The other thing is rehabilitation. So it's just as important to build new affordable housing as it is to look at some of your old housing stock. Fitchburg has a lot of old, aged housing stock, especially in the Belmar neighborhood. I came from property management, and I had extensive experience working both in Belmar and in the Fish Hatchery corridor. And I know I've been in apartment buildings here in Fitchburg where I wanted to get out because I was worried they were going to fall on my head. And there's a lot of progress that could be made on rehabilitation. You also have a lot of very small buildings with small landlords. And you know, if a 100-unit building has one vacant apartment, it's no big deal. But if a 4-unit has a vacant apartment, it's hard to make the mortgage. And then maybe you say, well, I know I really shouldn't rent to this family based on the application, but I really need to make my mortgage. So one of the things that we can do is look at, if we have owners that are looking to get out of some of those units, give them a path to get out, buy up some units, have some consolidation, bring in professional property management that's going to do those strict background checks and be very accountable, and then bring the financing in, whether it's, you know, tax credits from WIDA, grants from the county, grants from the Federal Home Loan Bank, tax exempt bonds for low interest rates, do the rehab, and make sure that those units that you have are truly affordable, and to Dorothy's point, make sure we can keep the current residents in them. So that's all I got.
One program that we worked with Section 42, it was the Maple Lawn Apartments up there off of kind of south of Greenway Cross and around Pike there. We worked with Royal Capital out of Milwaukee, and in that situation, they had some vacancies at that time, but they also owned the ones, is it called Seven Oaks? There in the Nob Hill area of Madison. So they were able to keep most of the residents there by kind of moving them, you know, to units that were available. While they did a complete renovation in those units, they got new, it wasn't just carpet and paint, it was new kitchens, new bathrooms, and they even put in a fire safety sprinkler system, not behind the studs, but they did it in kind of a soffit there to make it more cost affordable to do it. They added garages there, a fitness center, and
Computer room.
And a computer room
And a
as
little
well.
lounge area, kitchen,
Yeah,
gathering space.
so that was a real success story for us to get some of that older multifamily, you know, housing stock really upgraded, you know, to more modern amenities. Didn't necessarily change the bedroom to bathroom ratio there for some of the families. That's still a challenge for us as well, that sometimes we don't have the right kind of unit mix for the families with kids, you know, there, and they're doubling up, you know, kids in bedrooms and stuff like that. So I think that's another thing that was identified in our report here, was trying to get some 3-bedroom units and things like that for those families that we have with children.
I'd really like to thank Rob for all of your work that you've been doing. You really did, come at the housing, came to the Dane County Housing Authority at a time when not a lot was happening, and you've really made a lot happen around the county, and it's been incredibly beneficial. And you've created as many possible units and used as many possible vouchers as you have could, and I really appreciate that work. So I just want to say that. Another thing I just want to bring up is, when we're thinking about these things, is that, to quote Wayman Winston, housing is where jobs go to sleep at night. So when we're thinking about housing, or workforce housing, or affordable housing, it's really economic development. And when we think about it with economic development eyes, it's a little bit different. We're like, because we want to invest in business, but in order to invest in business, we have to invest in workforce. And I think that it feels odd sometimes talking about, all the money that we have to, put into workforce housing and affordable housing, but it's really a business investment. And, which is why when I'm working around the county, I talk about it as workforce housing. So I think it's really just helpful to remember that we're not, we're not doing something that isn't, essential to community development and economic development in particular. So, any other discussion or comments?
I was just gonna ask, speaking of combining the two, is there any hope for live-work housing kind of things? I grew up in Milwaukee in neighborhoods where, depending on which way you walk to school, you could stop at any number of small grocery stores and little corner stores and buy penny candy. I would love to bring back the ability to have those little
Right.
neighborhood gathering places, is
Yeah.
what they
I think
effectively
it would
are.
be really helpful as we go along to put together a list of different tools that Fitchburg has available to it, in terms of whether it's street widths or changing street width options, or housing types and locations. I think we should put together a list so we can see them all, look at them all together, and when, as you're moving forward with the TIF, really look at those, scrutinize those, so that we understand which is really the best bang for the buck and meets the needs of Fitchburg.
Well, and how we can get, because there was an article or two in the last couple of weeks talking with some developers about the push for walkable neighborhoods, which we want, but ground level retail, which frankly has been oversold as a whatever, because it's a lot of it's not working, and it's not going to work. And if it's not going to work in a good economy, to make a cash flow, I mean, you want it, and it's very, very desirable, but any of us could take you a drive around the county, and I could show you 25 places where, and so I want to make sure, number one, to your point earlier about making sure the communication with the city before things go forward, which you get everywhere, I'm sure, before things go forward, because I think there's a reason this has taken a while to get to this point. And it's not just because Fitchburg's going, look, we're not going to play that game, because one of the other things the numbers show is that regardless of who's involved, we are big time into low-income housing in this city, massively. And there's going to be a lot of everyday citizens that go, boy, we're at the table already. You may argue about whether we're at the table the right way, but we're there very, very dramatically already. We're very affected by Madison policy, as other suburbs are. And I think it gets back to the discussion about the comp plan.
Well, a question to that is that true because when Fitchburg became a city, it ended up with all the apartment buildings, which is now affordable housing, that had been part of Madison's growth into the town of Fitchburg?
Well, and Madison, and others in the room can speak to the history of Fitchburg a little bit better than I can, but part of that effort was to keep Madison from annexing
encroaching
additional
further.
property into the city of Fitchburg. So it
Right.
wasn't a lack of interest in real estate on their part.
But the vast majority of the affordable housing that we have is in those parts
In
at
that
the north
corridor.
edge that we inherited, that Madison had been developing in the town.
But if you remember right, some of the projects that were in Fitchburg when they developed
Correct.
were state-of-the-art projects, and they
Oh,
were
yes.
cutting edge, and they
Right.
were where people wanted to be. So I guess
Correct.
I would disagree
And
with your
as
comment.
as they age, they become low
Right.
income.
Right,
I remember when Allied Drive was one of the most desirable areas in the
Mhm.
city.
yeah.
So they've all gone through
It's-
their, I
it's-
mean, I understand your
So
point,
it's
but
transitional, you'll see it, I mean,
Mhm.
where you
Somerset
clean up
Circle.
the crime in one place,
Somerset.
it just
Yeah.
moves to the next. I mean,
Somerset
that's,
Circle off Badger Road was a high-end apartment living
That's
area.
what it was before.
Private, it was a really
Somerset
high-end
Circle.
outside, and that.
Yeah, that's
became
right. I
lower
forgot
income
that.
over time.
Fairways and Pines was a golf community, okay?
So
Oh.
if we don't have any more questions or comments, should we
Okay.
address the resolution with the amendment by?
yeah, I
Yes.
guess I want some verbiage on that friendly amendment, Brian, if you want to.
verbiage.
The last line.
So the last line, I'm thinking of adding something that future payment in lieu of tax agreements equal to the existing city levy/property tax rate.
Yeah, put
The
it
very
there.
last sentence of the last year result.
Future payments equal to the existing property tax rate.
Yeah, very last, yeah.
Yeah, the last one.
This one?
Mhm.
And that's equal to the city portion of,
Yeah, the city,
This is the existing
the city levy.
levy. Well, that's fair.
Levy our costs.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine.
Got it?
So we have, we have a motion, a second on the friendly amendment,
All in
Yes.
favor?
same?
Yes.
Okay.
all right,
Oh, did you?
Perfect. Okay, then we can go back to our agenda item on May 1st.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Rob.
Rob.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor.
So just to be clear, we just voted on making the amendment, we still need to make,
Main motion.
well,
But we have to vote on that
We
resolution.
voted on the amendment.
the amendment and then the
I
resolution.
think.
everybody's leaving, we didn't
Yeah.
pass anything other than the amendment, so I just
Yeah.
wanna make sure.
Right.
Yeah.
He's gonna be disappointed if he's not sitting here. And we vote again.
Do you know, is he using the
Might be
restroom?
just trying to wash them.
Fun, while we're maybe waiting for Gottman to come back, the resolution will also go to CETA on March 19th. It's gonna go to the Plan Commission, March 17th, and then Finance and Council on the 24th. So that's kind of the path that this will take.
We
I
did
got
not,
locked out of my computer.
we did not officially go to public appearances for non-agenda items. Can we dispense with
Yeah,
that?
just vote, and then just hit restart.
I thought they,
So that means that circumvents logging in.
Yeah, yeah. That's what they told me you should do, so.
Question for the group here, is this meeting time and day seem to work well for
Mhm.
people's schedules? We were trying to, we've got so many meetings on the calendar, standard meetings, so we were trying to pick a night where we had some capacity here. And it seems like we had good turnout. We're only missing one
Mondays
today,
are
so we're
decent.
hoping that maybe it works for people's standing calendars of other commitments that you have.
So God, while you were gone, we realized that we had only passed the amendment, not the resolution, so do we have a motion to pass the resolution with the amendment?
Yes, ma'am.
A second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? And you made him wait till you got back.
Aren't you nice?
We thought you'd want to be a part of the event.
So the resolution was approved?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Legally approved, how about that?
So I
Okay.
can't find my agenda because it got lost in this.
Want a printed one?
Well, the resolution?
No, the agenda, my computer shut down, so anyway, I just want to see. Okay.
Well, we have the,
Reports from departments.
and we actually have the, kind of the action items to go through, because we moved to the
Yeah.
implementation and action, review of the implementation and action items.
Okay.
So I just,
The next one.
went through the plan, and you'll find the implementation items for 2019 and 2020. And I think what I'd suggest at this time is that maybe for the next meeting, you have an opportunity to go through and look at some of the recommendations that were in the plan. And then maybe we should kind of come back and discuss what we would like to make as things that we move forward to other committees, being, some of the items such as, do we want to have the planning department look at accessory dwellings? Do we want to have, make a recommendation to the council that they ask that the fees be looked at? I mean, there's all sorts of things within the plan that were recommended, and I think we really need to get a consensus as to what we'd like to see move forward. So would that be a good idea for the next? We're give you a little bit of homework to do, but if you can, everybody has their own different views on what should be a priority and what would be good things to move forward to get to that end goal. So I think if we really take some time and look at that plan.
So is the idea to go through all of them or just the first?
Well, I think we should probably stay on the timeline that they kind of set forward for us, so we don't get overwhelmed with, if we can check off some of the things that are on the action item, because we really, really do need to focus towards that funding element, and that's gonna take some time for us to work on. If we hold that TIF district open for another year, we really need to have some good policies and procedures in place when that happens.
Because as part of that resolution by statute, we need to kind of share with the council how we would utilize
The
those
funding.
dollars and the funding. So we need to kind of really come up with what are our strategies and programs in anticipation of those dollars to share that with council when they're voting on that resolution then. And you figure, we're already in 2020, here, it'll soon be, June, here, so that's only, a year and a half away, here where we,
Right.
so that time will go by fast.
Yeah.
So
And we only meet every quarter.
Right.
I was gonna say,
Just this year.
who decided it should be quarterly?
The people.
And
Those people,
can we talk about meeting
We can have special meetings, you know that.
every other month or something, rather than just quarterly?
For now, I think quarterly is until we get into a definite, maybe next year, we can start looking at meeting more regularly. But right now, we just have those items on our 2020 to-do list. So I think what Mike and I had talked about for the next meeting is we're gonna probably start doing some research within our department on different communities and some of the programming that they have and what has worked and what hasn't worked.
Yep.
Because we do know that some of the communities have programs that, Pat's been into this for a bit from Monona, and they've had some programs that weren't successful. And we wanna be able to share kind of our findings. Mike just did a presentation at the Ellers Conference with 2 other communities that are further along in the programming, and we want to bring back some of their ideas and actually look out further than what we know of, and bring that back to you guys for at least conversations, to start conversations. So we need a little bit of time.
Yeah,
to-
and I think, I mean, we actually do have a lot of homework to do, because these are all very specific and targeted policies that you want to consider as a city, and just one of them is time consuming, because we have to look at all the different angles and, you know, the
Right.
priorities and the process, and, yeah, so.
And we're really looking to you guys to bring your expertise forward on some of these things, you know, from a financial background, from a, you know, a state policy background, from real estate development, from property management and, you know, things that you have good ideas as well, so.
So
would say-
will you be connecting with people as you're doing your homework to kind of integrate, and, or do we have to wait until the next time we meet to be
Yeah,
heard?
because it's gonna take us some time to
Right,
put everything together.
but if you
But feel
want
free to tap
expertise
any
from
of
the
us
group,
who
will
you think might
you be?
helpful.
Oh, yeah, like
Okay.
Olivia might say, hey, you know, and feel free to reach out to us too, if you run across
Okay.
something like, you know, hey, this community did this, will you look into it for us? Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
Okay.
And I've worked extensively with ADUs and that whole concept lately, and we're probably gonna do a whole workshop thing at the summit, so, I'm happy to share that information with you, what I've learned.
Right.
The only thing I would add is if, and you tell me, but if there's relevant parts of the new, is tomorrow night the final approval on comp plan?
It could be. It's up for action or consideration and action.
Because if there's relevant parts of the comp plan discussion that affect our mission or what we have to do, I think we'll want to know that, because the council is going to face some important choices tomorrow night. So,
Right.
and that frankly are going to send a signal to developers and people in the business community in this county, and I don't know if they realize it, but they will be. And so I want to make sure we're conscious of that, so.
I think at some point in time too, going to Brian's earlier point about not only the fees, but our dedication requirements there. It might be helpful to maybe have our planning staff come in and just kind of share maybe some of the differences between Smart Code, where we do provide some of that, let's say, regulatory relief, you know, compared to other areas, and then maybe even talked a little bit, because even though we didn't have Smart Code in the Renaissance on the Park where we did that land breakdown, we did do some regulatory relief there, with street widths and I think sidewalk, only maybe on one side. Yeah, so maybe we could just point to some of those examples where we did, you know, kind of that combination of some regulatory and dedication relief there. The other unique thing about Smart Code, just because we, in the fee structure, we had talked about the parkland dedications maybe being higher than our other peer communities and everything. In Smart Code, parkland dedication is based on the minimum requirements there of number of units. It's not based on the actual number of units, so you get some relief through Smart Code, actually, if you go with greater density, but you're only paying kind of the minimum dedication requirements that are within that zoning classification and everything. So
It'd be
that's-
really interesting to see where your smart codes are in Fitchburg.
Yeah, we can have them, you know,
Yeah.
it's basically uptown Fitchburg,
Uh-huh.
you know, between Sain and 14,
Uh-huh.
kind of north of Lacey Hay Farm Road. And now the new neighborhood, Terra Bessa, on the east side of MM, where the new Oregon School is under construction. Those are kind of the first,
Okay.
you know, and yeah, Addison on the corner here too, that Ron Fedler did, at the southwest corner of Sain and Lacey Road. So, mhm.
And that's probably where some of the initial pushback came from, because there's a lot of density on that parcel.
Mhm.
Yep.
Oh, and one other consideration, I guess, that we really need to look at, and this might be some direction that Mike and I are gonna have to take as well as we have a park kind of a comprehensive plan that was approved not too long ago, that we would have to look and see what that policy says as far as parkland dedication, because you always have cause and effect. So if you know, there's always other areas that might need to be looked at if we would make a recommendation. So anything that you guys would recommend, we would probably take through CETA then, because you're advisory to CETA. So then Jennifer would take it back to CETA, and CETA would move your initiatives forward, because she's our CETA rep. So that's kind of how it would work.
When you say approved, they were approved by CETA or the council or on the park issue?
Parks and
By council, yeah,
By
those
council.
plans have all been approved by council.
alright.
So they're, and I don't know if they're actually, I think they're amendments to the comp plan, and everything has to be cohesive with what the comp plan says. So if there's something in one of those plans, then it would have to go through the actual process of an amendment. So we have to keep all that in mind too. But, and if anybody wants a printed document of the housing plan, just shoot me an email and I can get that for you. I like to write in things, so if you want something that you can write in or make notes of, just let me know. Alrighty, do we have any department
One other
things?
thing we might do too, especially when we get into the toolkit, after we maybe provided some examples, we may look to have a couple of you maybe be on a subcommittee that would delve into that a little bit more, and then bring back kind of some ideas and recommendations to this larger group there, if we need a little bit more time dedicated to it outside of our quarterly meetings. Just an option.
Right.
So, I understand what you're saying, so looking at the list for 2019, one of the things that the housing committee, which we are tasked with, is reviewing the park fees and dedication. That was a 2019 thing, obviously we're in 2020, so is that gonna be the first thing we tackle, or are you guys gonna look at the things more in 2020, which is, you know, the trust fund, the grant program, the affordable housing proposal review, is that, which things are you guys gonna start working on as your homework, so that we know what to.
Our homework
Well, I guess I would like you to prioritize maybe what you think we should be working on. You know, from a advisory committee, because I think what you're gonna do is you're gonna tell Jennifer, okay, these are the things that our advisory committee would like to see moved forward. And that, you know, because not all of it's gonna be CETA doing the work, and not all of it's gonna be this committee here. So I think we need to prioritize what you know, Brian, you might want us to say, hey, I really think the fee thing, and you've got a council person right here. And she can take things back to the council as well, like, hey, I'm sitting on this. So we have two avenues here. We have a direct relationship to the council, and we have a direct relationship to our housing authority, Jennifer.
Can I just ask you a question? So when you put these priorities together, I mean, you guys took a long time, and I will just say the Fitchburg Housing Plan, I should have said it when, Jason was here, but it's a great plan, and you worked very hard at it and had a tremendous amount of input, and you've articulated these priorities for a reason. Is the priority looking at park fees number one because it's number one for a reason? No, it's
No, it's
within the given year. Okay, so within the given year, you haven't actually prioritized them.
So those were all recommendations of things the city should look at.
Right.
Nothing was a policy decision. Now we're getting to that point where we need to start making policy decisions. Is that a correct analogy?
Priorities to look at.
Right.
That could lead to policy
Decisions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I'm right, there are groups that are already working, looking at park fees. Is CETA at all, or is it just kind of within parks, or?
Nope.
There have been,
I don't think there's been any charge given to that
Right.
effect.
okay.
So
Okay.
I think at this point, we're making recommendations to you as a council person, and we're making recommendations to CETA. So Julia would be reporting back based upon what Jennifer tells her that came out of this group to council.
Mhm.
But you're our sitting person on council, so I would hope that you would take some charge too,
Mhm.
based upon what you're hearing here.
So I think at the next meeting, we want to prioritize, what are the things that you think we or other bodies and entities within the city, you would like to see kind of priorities? to
Based
look at?
on the ones that you've given us, not creating new ones.
Right.
Right.
At this point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
But we're always open to suggestions,
Yeah.
you know.
The only caveat there is that we may take forward some recommendations from this group, and our policymakers may decide different on priorities.
Right,
or,
right,
you know,
right,
whether
right.
they wanted to focus on.
It's easier for us to start with what you
Mhm.
have, because you've worked so hard to get this,
Right.
so I think it feels right
Yeah.
just to work with those first.
And I think the other thing is that, as you pointed out, Olivia, we can say, you know, we went through this housing plan, and this was one of the action items identified, versus starting from scratch. There, we can kind of just point back to this.
Yeah.
We do
Yeah.
the same thing with our economic development strategic plan, too. This was identified in our city in motion document, and that's why we're looking at it, or, you know, focusing
And that's a
on
very
that area.
interesting thing you just mentioned, sort of the economic development plan, and I wonder what kind of correlation or crossover you could, when we talk about workforce housing or affordable housing and the work that we want to put forward, and does it actually promote your economic development? Or I don't know what is in your
I
economic
think in our
development.
economic development plan, it talks about the housing plan,
Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of
Right.
reference
Right,
each
right,
other.
right. So
Mhm.
it just seems like,
that should be a priority.
well, I think
Yeah.
it should be integrated into our process, you know? I
Yeah.
mean, just kind of getting workforce housing and affordable housing on the radar of economic development and workforce development and business investment track, because that's really what it is. So maybe using that in terms of our referrals or where it goes next. And, yeah, referencing other documents. Could you bring a copy of the workforce, the economic development plan to the, or can you send us one?
We can send
I
them.
can send
Yeah.
the link
Mhm.
out
That would
if
be
you
great.
want to
Yeah,
take.
that'd be so
Yeah.
great.
We'll
Thank
just
you.
send a link out.
We just don't want to overwhelm you with too much reading.
Well, the plan, I mean, you know, we have 3 months.
Yeah.
Well, the one
We'll
you
be
sent,
okay.
the one from MSC was good. That's
Yeah,
what I
that was an
figured.
excellent
That's all
plan.
I read it. I thought, wow, they did their work.
Yeah.
Okay, so our next scheduled meeting is on Monday, June 8th. And I just appreciate it, I know we're getting into summer vacations and things like that, but I just appreciate it if you can't make it to a meeting, if you could let me know, just so we can assure that there's a quorum, and if we don't have one, then I can cancel it and we don't reschedule right away.
Okay.
Alrighty, that's it for us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, I guess,
Wait,
A
we should
motion on
adjourn.
agenda?
Do we have a
Yeah.
motion to adjourn? Before we,
Yeah.
before we adjourn, I just want to thank you guys so much. This has been a really great, wonderful effort that you're pulling together, and, yeah, you've made a really big difference in, for the region with the work that you're doing. So I really just want to thank you, both of you, for your work and your commitment to this, because it's really a long road to hoe and very complicated. So, I appreciate it, or we appreciate it.
So you made a motion, I second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion
Thank you.
adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.